Jerusalem. That was the destination. Ships from England, Flanders, Germany. Hundreds of them. This was the Second Crusade. Then the weather changed. The fleet was blown off course onto the Portuguese coast. Storm-battered, behind schedule, they dropped anchor and waited. That's when he appeared, a man who called himself king, though Rome hadn't confirmed it yet. He rode to meet them on the shore. He had a proposal.
Help me take a Muslim city to the south. Everything inside the walls, the goods, the prisoners, the plunder, is yours.
The Crusaders argued for days. Jerusalem was the mission.
The spoils are waiting for us. Forget the city. We must head toward our true goal, Jerusalem.
But in the end, they said yes to the king. 3 days down the coast until the river appeared, wide, slow, and above it, Lisbon. They were now in Lisbon.
My name is Matt, and I used modern AI tools to reconstruct Lisbon. All based on historical paintings and records. The story of a Christian city, from its very first days to that fateful day that changed everything. This is what the city saw from the walls. A siege tower taller than the battlements, ships blocking the river, thousands of men who had been waiting and sieging for 4 months. The city had been called Lisbon for over 400 years. The walls broke, the gates opened. The terms said the Muslims could leave with their lives. Some did. Those who stayed were pushed outside the walls, into a neighborhood called Moraria, the Moorish quarter. It still exists today. The city had a new name now, Lisbon. 108 years later, it would become the capital of a nation. But first, it had to survive. The last king of the founding dynasty died without a son. Only a daughter, Beatrice. She was married to Juan I of Castile, and Juan decided that made him king of Portugal.
The Castilian king shall be our sovereign. Then it is settled.
Most of the Portuguese nobility agreed with him. The merchants of Lisbon did not. They backed a different man, João, an illegitimate son of the old royal blood. No formal claim, just the city behind him. Juan came for Lisbon with everything he had. His army surrounded the walls. His fleet stretched a chain across the Tagus. Nothing got in, nothing got out. Inside, starvation. Outside, 20,000 men who weren't going anywhere. Then the Black Death arrived in the Castilian camp. Juan watched his army rot around him. Commander after commander dead. His own wife, Beatrice, the woman whose crown this was all for, struck down by plague in the siege camp. He burned his tents and retreated. The city had not won. It had simply outlasted. João of Aviz was crowned king the following year. His house, the House of Aviz, would rule Portugal for 2 centuries. And it was under the Aviz kings that Lisbon would become something the world had never seen. The Portuguese kings had been trying to reach India for 80 years. The man the king finally chose to finish the job was Vasco da Gama. This is the shore at Belém. This is the morning he left.
4 ships, his brother Paulo commanding the second, 170 men, a city that came to watch, clergy, nobles, women, children. Nobody on that beach knew who would come back. He was sailing into water that had no European name, toward a destination nobody from this shore had ever reached by sea, on a route that existed only in theory. The ships pushed out into the Tagus and turned south. Da Gama came back 2 years later. Then another fleet left. Then another. Then another. Within a decade, Lisbon controlled the entire spice route from India to Europe. The Venetians, who had monopolized that trade for centuries, were now buying their pepper in Lisbon. The city doubled in size, then doubled again. Nearly 200,000 people, 1 in 10 of them African. Then they found Brazil. The money built churches, palaces, monasteries, an entirely new architectural style. Stone carved with ropes and anchors and exotic creatures from the edges of the known world. Empire written in limestone. Lisbon had been a medieval city on the edge of Europe. Now it was the center of everything. This is Lisbon in 1505. 7 years after Da Gama came back. The spice money is arriving. The king is planning the monastery. And yet, look at the city, still the castle on the hill. Still the medieval walls zigzagging down the slope. Dense white buildings packed onto the hillside, the same way they had been for centuries. And there, just below the castle, the Sé, the cathedral. Built in 1147 on the exact site of the city's main mosque, the year the Crusaders took Lisbon. The first thing they built, still standing today. Still the same streets the Crusaders walked into 3.5 centuries earlier. Empires are built faster than cities change. This is the Chafariz del Rey, the King's Fountain, a square on the Lisbon waterfront. Boats unloading at the quay, red-roofed towers, the city pressing right down to the water's edge.
This is the payment.
And the crowd, African men, Ottoman merchants, Portuguese nobles, soldiers, dock workers, clergy, every nation on earth passing through one square. A sack of pepper bought in India for 2 cruzados, sold here for 30. The King of Portugal became the richest monarch in Europe. The Tagus River had become the center of the world. And this is where that world collided every single day. This is Lisbon from the river, 1572. The castle still crowning the hill. The city cascading down to the water. Thousands of red rooftops, ships in every direction. The king had moved his palace from that hilltop down to the river's edge, so he could watch the ships arrive. Inside its tower, he installed the Casa da India, the entire administration of the empire. Every trade route, every cargo, every tax on every sack of spice passing through Lisbon was controlled from that building. Every ship that passed carried something that made Portugal richer. The men who made this map called it a flourishing trade center in Portugal. They were underselling it. Every ship coming to Lisbon passed here first. Cascais, a fishing town on the Atlantic coast. It sat at the mouth of the Tagus, the last anchorage before the river. Big ships would shelter here in rough weather, waiting for a fair wind to carry them the final miles to Lisbon, the gateway to the richest port in the world. This is the Hieronymus Monastery. Construction started in 1501. 3 years after Da Gama came back. It took 100 years to finish. The king funded it with a 5% tax on every spice imported from the east. They called it the Vintena da Pimenta, the pepper tax. Every column, every vault, every inch of carved limestone paid for by the spice trade. The stone itself is covered in ropes, anchors, coral, sea monsters. Not decoration, a statement. This is what the ocean gave us. Da Gama is buried inside. He prayed in the small chapel that stood on this spot the night before he sailed. He left from this shore. He came back to it. And the building that replaced that chapel is the largest monument Portugal ever built to the age he started. The golden century didn't last. A king died without heirs. Spain took the throne. The Dutch dismantled the spice routes. The monopoly was gone. Brazil sent gold where India once sent pepper. Lisbon was no longer the center of the world, but it was still magnificent. And it would stay that way until one fateful day in the 18th century, but more on that later. This is the Terreiro do Paço, the Palace Square, the beating heart of Lisbon. Horses, carriages, merchants, nobles, children, dogs. The whole city passing through one open square on the river. Behind it, the Ribeira Palace. Stretching along the Tagus waterfront. 4 stories. A dome rising above the roofline. Ships on the river below. This is what power looked like in 17th century Lisbon. This square has seen everything. On April 23rd, 1662, the streets leading here were hung with silks and cloth of gold. Catherine of Braganza, daughter of the king who threw out the Spanish, walked across this square to board a ship. She was going to England to marry Charles II. Her dowry included Bombay and Tangier. The city lined the streets. The square filled with soldiers. Inside the palace, the rooms told a different story. Gilded ceilings, powdered wigs, Brazilian gold paying for what pepper once built. The king washing the feet of the poor once a year in a ceremony that filled the great hall. Courtiers packed in on tiered benches, watching their monarch perform humility in a room that cost a fortune. The palace stood for 250 years. Everything you see here, the square, the facade, the dome, the gilded hall, will be gone in a single morning. The tower was built between 1514 and 1520. Its job was to guard the mouth of the Tagus. Every ship that ever left for India sailed past it. Every ship that came back heavy with spice passed it again coming home. Fortress, prison, customs post, lighthouse. It has been all of these things. Behind it on the plain, the monastery. Commissioned by the same king, built in the same architectural style on the same stretch of riverbank. The royal pantheon of the House of Aviz, kings and explorers buried inside. Monks still living in the long wing to the left. 200 years old and still standing. Though by now the money had moved on. Brazilian gold funding Baroque churches in the city centre. Not maintaining Manuline stone out here at Belém. This is Lisbon. The Belém Tower in the water. The monastery on the plain. The city stretching across the hills. The palace on the river. The castle on the hill. 250,000 people. 600 years of history in one frame. The Crusaders who took this city. The dynasty that sent ships to India. The square where a princess left for England. The gilded halls. The pepper tax carved in limestone. Look at it carefully. Parts of it still stand. But the city in this painting, this Lisbon, was about to cease to exist. November 1st, 1755. All Saints' Day. Every church in Lisbon was packed.
Audite vocem meam.
Every candle lit.
Sanctus, sanctus, sanctus.
The most religious city in Europe at prayer.
Populus meus audite. Time est jam ut arreptis.
At 9:40 in the morning, the ground moved. The epicenter was in the Atlantic Ocean, 200 kilometers offshore. Magnitude 8.5 to 9.0, the largest earthquake ever to strike Europe. The shaking was felt as far away as Finland. In Lisbon, it lasted up to 6 minutes. Fissures 5 meters wide tore open in the streets. Buildings that had stood for centuries came down in seconds. The churches, packed with worshippers, collapsed. Those who survived ran for the docks. Open ground, safety. Then they noticed something strange. The water in the Tagus was pulling back. The riverbed appearing. Mud, old shipwrecks, lost cargo. People ran in to grab what they could. 40 minutes after the earthquake, the water came back. A wall of it, funneled up the Tagus straight into the city. 2 more waves followed. The fires burned for 5 days. 30 to 40,000 dead. 85% of the city's buildings gone. The city you have been looking at, gone. This is what was left. The cathedral, walls still standing. Roof gone. The same building that went up the year the Crusaders took this city in 1147. Built on the site of the main mosque. 600 years of stone, earthquake, renovation, survival. The south tower collapsed. The roof of the nave came down, but the walls held. It was repaired, rebuilt, and is still standing on that same hill today. The churches, facades intact, interiors collapsed. The buildings that had been packed with worshippers at 9:40 that morning. Every candle lit for All Saints' Day. The walls that held the congregation in had become the walls that crushed them. And the palace, the Ribera Palace, the shell of it still standing. Enough of the frame survived to rebuild. The walls were still standing, the windows still in their arches. They demolished it anyway. In its place, Pombal built a grand open square facing the river, the Plaza do Comercio. Construction began in the years after the earthquake and was largely complete by the 1770s. Locals still call it Terreiro do Paço, Palace Square. Even the metro station keeps the old name. The palace has been gone for 270 years. The king refused to ever sleep inside a stone building again. He moved the entire royal court to a tented complex in the hills of Ajuda, outside the city. He lived there for the rest of his life. After his death, his daughter Maria I began building a proper palace on the same site, the Palacio Nacional de Ajuda. It still stands there today. And across the whole hillside, the same story. Walls with no roofs. Facades with no interiors. Streets buried under meters of debris. The city still recognizable in its outlines, just hollowed out. Tens of thousands dead, the rest living in tents on the hills, looking down at what had been their city, a city of shells. The earthquake didn't just destroy a city, it changed how Europe thought. Voltaire wrote it into Candide. Kant published 3 papers on it. The most religious city in Europe struck on its holiest day. The philosophers of the Enlightenment couldn't ignore it. The king's prime minister, Pombal, sent a questionnaire to every parish in the country. How long did the shaking last? What buildings stood? The first scientific survey of an earthquake in history. He rebuilt Lisbon on a grid, with wooden cage structures inside the walls. The first earthquake-resistant buildings ever constructed. They tested them by marching troops around scale models to simulate the shaking. And through all of it, some things survived. The tower, the monastery, the cathedral, the castle. Nearly 900 years after the Crusaders took this city, you can still walk up to those walls today.